Alpesh Patel is the CEO of Profinium Partners and joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So look, we're reporting about what's happening in Iraq. Latest is that the Kurds have apparently retaken a dam quite crucial to Mosul, a major dam, and making some headway against the IS, Islamic State. It's not enough. The US is involved. There's a lot of pressure on the UK to get involved too, but there's war fatigue amongst the electorate.
Well, what's quite clearly happening is Britain's getting more and more involved. I tell you what, when I read this, I was very proud to be British. It's a shame we're being sucked in. It's a shame we have no choice but to be sucked in, because these are not terrorists. These are barbarians. We're talking about them wiping out whole villages. We're talking about, I mean, that term's used very often, genocide, but it is that they want to wipe out entire bloodlines in the Islamic State. And it's not a state, and it's not Islamic. That's the wrong. What angers me is where the heck are the UAE, where are Saudi Arabia, where are Turkey, well-armed Islamic countries? Because you know what's going to happen when all this dies down. It's going to be, oh, the West is killing Muslims. And it's not the case. They're defending and protecting Muslims, and we need Saudi and UAE and Turkey to step up.
To focus on the UK, though, the Telegraph is saying that the turn in this, because there's been a resistance, hasn't there, to get involved militarily.
Yes, of course.
The turn in this now is that whether or not the Islamic State or these militants will pose a direct threat to Western Europe.
I think to some extent that's just an additional justification. We have moral justification enough on the basis that these terrorist barbarians are wiping out people. Our humanitarian foreign policy should be that we will defend, and I wish we could defend every part of the world where these kinds of things happen, not only when our national security is at threat. But yes, that has been the window dressing, that our national security is at threat. Of course it's not. We've got ample domestic safeties in place to resist any threat out of Iraq. This is actually a humanitarian play. It is David Cameron saying this is the right thing to do, in the way that Blair was criticised for saying, actually, on a moral basis, put aside legal issues, on a moral basis, this was the right thing to do. And David Cameron's doing exactly the same thing.
And just briefly, Alpesh, I mean, the scale of force, we were talking about, what, our Tornado jets, and there are boots on the ground, right? They're preparing the way for the...
who apparently direct where the missiles should be dropped. So it's still relatively hands-off. It's not soldiers in the conventional sense. It's special forces, so it's pinpoint strikes, because obviously what we don't want is a body count, because then it'll change the equation. But this sadly needs to be done. It's unfortunate it needs to be done by Britain and Western forces. It should be done by Middle Eastern countries to clean up their own backyard and the mess that they create themselves amongst themselves.
Okay. Let's talk about China Daily. It's taking a look at Missouri protesters. This has moved on now. We're in the worst night of violence, our correspondent are saying, since the shooting of an unarmed black teenager. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, race in America is still a fundamental problem 40 years after they removed segregation. I mean, it's very easy to forget that this was a country which de facto had apartheid only 40 years ago. And you see, if countries like South Africa have problems, you'd expect America to have come a lot further, but they haven't. So that division between white and black, of course, it was a white officer and a black teenager. I don't think you would have had these problems if they were of the same colour. Sadly, it would have mattered. It's about poverty. It's about the lack of opportunities that these communities feel that they don't have. It's about racial stereotypes that they feel that they're being accused of, being part of a criminal underclass.
And of course it raises the question which nobody's done,
in the sunshine, which is, well, we've got an African-American in the White House. What's he done to alleviate these social problems at home?
Yeah. Let's move on to the Financial Times, though, because I want to talk about this Fed blow to the global banks over living wills. I mean, is this based... I mean, this is the US, America Central Bank saying to banks around the world, there is no guarantee that you can come and get cheap money. I mean, is this... this is that willing to allow banks to fail if they mess up?
Well, let me explain living wills. They're basically the emergency plans banks will have in case of a crisis, the kind of crisis we saw in 2008. What's worrying about this, and we should all be worried, is that the Federal Reserve is saying we won't effectively be lender of last resort. you make your own emergency plans and make sure you don't have to come crying to us. And the banks are saying, well, wait a minute, your job is that if there's a global meltdown, that we do come to you.
Is it?
Yes, they are meant to be, legally they're meant to be lenders of last resort. What they're saying is, let's just look at what last resort means. Right. Your definition of last resort seems to be first resort, is what they're saying to the banks. In all of this, we, the poor consumer, the poor citizen in countries around the world, don't realise it, but there's a greater risk that we're going to be left, again, naked in case of a global meltdown.
But it also comes down to there are more guidelines for how banks run their business, though, right? I mean, if a bank
there's been more regulation
messes up and does inappropriate lending.
And the great thing is, what the Federal Reserve is saying, you banks are not, you're not making the right assumptions about how people will panic. And the banks are saying, well, of course we're not, because we want to come back to you as soon as we can and get some more bailout funding. As I say, the worst scenario in this is, should a crisis hit, they're unprepared. They don't have defences in place to protect us, to protect you and me. And that should be terrifying us. And, of course, none of us worry until it happens.
Yeah.
But neither of the banks or the government, whoever's to blame, are ready, and they're not doing their jobs, not just according to this, in protecting us.
Let's get through the rest of these, because everyone was really optimistic about European markets. They weren't reacting to geopolitical problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seemed
very
like
robust.
it was all fine, but we did hear a little bit about European growth not being perhaps as robust.
Yeah.
Pretty dismal last week, those numbers.
Well, yeah, now the Wall Street Journal is saying investors are backing off.
Yeah, I think it's not so much a quiet time for the markets as it is for journalists. It's a little bit early to call the decline and fall of Western civilization, European markets at the moment. We're up 1%. 2 years ago, we were talking about France defaulting, Portugal defaulting, Spain defaulting. This is not a bad place to be. OK, the Americans are up about 5%, but they've always been a bit more euphoric about their markets than we are. And at least we're up. And not only that, I think it's just a case of people just taking a bit of money off the table. They're saying, look, fund managers saying, we're going on holiday. I don't want to be looking at my BlackBerry. I'll just take the cash for now.
But are they not also, I mean, they're looking at these numbers. I mean, last week, France, once again, another quarter, zero growth. I mean, France is the old sick man of Europe. It's a bit of a basket case, France.
$14 trillion economy in Europe. If somebody has 0% growth, it's still $14 trillion. I think it's phenomenal that we're even hitting 0% growth. At least it's not negative. And I think it's time to buy into Europe. It's cheap.
Got a minute and a half. Let's talk about the last two stories.
Yeah.
Top bosses rewards now 143 times workers' pay. When you say it's contentious, and this is a controversial issue, it certainly is.
Well, I can imagine. I can't imagine where it's contentious, but I can take a guess. Look, 143 times. We all hate bosses, don't we? Says the CEO of a company.
We would never say so.
The major problem is here. These are FTSE 100 companies. So if you're getting paid 143 times your average worker at the top, let's look at your share price performance. Over the last 14 years, FTSE 100 companies, led by their bosses, have managed to deliver, guess what? 0% in share price improvement over 14 years. Not 10 years, not 7, 14 years. They haven't delivered. Zero, but they're getting paid 143 times the average worker. And I can't blame the average worker for not delivering that share price performance. It's got to be the boss. That's what they're being rewarded for. So that's the clearest way of saying to them, you know what, you're underperforming. You do not deserve it. Not just because you're getting paid more than the average worker, because you can't lift your share price. There's only one thing you're asked to do: elevate the share price, and you've not even managed to do that. But you're getting 143 times more.
I think your views are clear. On that one.
Congratulations to you two, huh? World champions.
Yes. The English, the women, done brilliantly. You watched a bit of this.
I watched a bit of this. I think they should have a bigger trophy. I don't know why men always have bigger trophies. Well, actually, I do know why men have bigger trophies, but we don't have time to discuss that. The women have done phenomenally well. First time in about 20 years. British sport is just going, English sport's just going from strength to strength.
It is. It's been a great
Thanks,
sporting
Alpesh.
summit. Alpesh, thank you. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.